I'm Chuck Norris, president of the United Fine Arts Federation. This is Danny Lane.
The history of martial arts can be traced back more than 1,000 years, starting in China, then migrating to Okinawa, Japan, and then Korea. Taekwondo, the Korean national sport and primary method of self-defense in that country, means punch and kick art. The Hyungs, here in America called Forms, are the foundation and base of all martial arts disciplines, especially Taekwondo. A dance-like routine, almost mechanical in its application, the techniques are taught by masters all over the world and interpreted as an imaginary fight between the practitioner and a multitude of opponents in a complete circle. Besides teaching the practitioner balance, timing, breath control, footwork, memory recall, and expressing the artistic expression of their physical techniques, what do all the different techniques and movements really mean? They seem almost senseless to dedicate years of perfecting each Hyung. During this video series, this is what we're going to find out, the secrets of Taekwondo Hyung. Hello, I'm Danny Lane, National Director of World Martial Arts Centers, 6th-degree black belt in the Chuck Norris United Fighting Arts Federation, and Master in Taekwondo. And welcome to my video series on the hidden secrets of Taekwondo. During this video series, I'm going to pass on what I feel are the real self-defense interpretations and applications of all the basic fundamentals, the Hyungs, and the complete fighting system of Taekwondo. I think you'll be amazed. I hope this will educate you and enlighten and also open up a whole new world of knowledge in your study of Taekwondo. The first video is going to be on the basic applications of all the basic fundamentals. I feel like a lot of people really misinterpret the actual real self-defense meaning behind many of the movements, and also the hidden movements and many different applications of each technique. So we're going to be starting out, first of all, what I feel is the foundation of all martial arts is the footwork, the stances, the stance utilization. My assistant, Mr. Todd Perigo, attention bow. And we're going to work basically on what we call the horse stance or the straddle leg stance, which is basically twice the distance the shoulders wide. And everybody, you know, I've traveled around almost 30 years all over the world, and everybody gets in the stance, and then they do their movements. And through my many studies of the different martial arts, especially Aikido, Ju-jitsu, and Judo, the stance is the power. Stances are when you shift your body weight to a particular position to be used for leverage and power. So instead of getting in a stance and then doing a move, which actually works against the natural body rotation, we work the first stance in the karate foundation to twist the hips. So the basic straddle leg punch, every system of martial arts does this, especially Taekwondo. The hips should be used to increase the power into the technique. So what we do is we punch the hips with the punch. For example, ready? Punch, 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 punch. So you'll notice that the hips break with the punch instead of going against the punch. The push and pull theory of two forces going opposite directions at the same time increases the power and leverage into the punch. But the hip action in this stance is primarily what this stance is used for, is twisting. So when Todd would take a fighting stance, and then he punches with the hips instead of the legs. The hips and legs are the primary point of leverage. Then the hips give that punch a lot more power. Okay, so the reverse punch, ready? Punch. Again, ready? Punch. Again, and punch. Okay, let's go back to the straddle stance. So you can use the straddle stance to develop. Even Todd is a professional kickboxer, and even the traditional movements can increase the leverage and power into his punches as long as you're punching with your hips and legs and making contact with the fist. Double punch, ready? Punch. 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 You'll notice in this move there's 5 basic elements that's just involved in a basic fundamental stance of this sort. And this is taught at the very beginning at white belt level. The stance utilization, the hip action, the breath control, the muscle tension, the focus of the punch, and the weight shift. Ready? Punch, punch, punch. Good. Return ready stance. Now, a lot of people don't realize that this straddle leg stance is also used in Judo and Ju-jitsu. For instance, if Todd was to grab me from behind and I'm standing up, my center of gravity is right around my hips. This is why the karate belt is tied here. My center of energy is right where my belt knot is tied. So if I drop down into the straddle stance and drop my center of gravity down lower, then it's very possible and it's very easy to throw him over. So without the proper stance, then there's not going to be any throw. So also the stance is used in the grappling arts of Judo, Ju-jitsu, and Aikido. So instead of just looking at the stance for punching, the stance is what makes it possible to do the throw. Okay, moving on to the next Taekwondo stance will be the forward stance. I feel like this is probably the hardest stance for students to learn and to develop and also understand. For some reason, people don't like to bend their front knee. But the front knee is bent parallel with the instep of the foot to protect the knee against any type of kick or pressure to always protect it. The back leg is locked, the hips are pushed forward. But the forward stance primarily is an offensive stance. And a lot of times people think it's a defensive stance, but primarily it's used for punching, or in your defenses, as you'll find out later on, it's used for striking primarily. So, the forward stance, go ahead and lock your knees, and then just shift forward. Lock your knees and shift forward. The forward stance is used many different ways. We use the stance, we call this full hip. When the total body weight comes straight forward towards the opponent, we call that full hip. And you can practice that by just locking your knees and then shifting straight forward. Your body weight shifting forward is what gives you that tremendous power at the point of impact. Based on the theory that all power is achieved on the last inch of the move, then the weight shifting forward along with your technique is what's going to give you tremendous power and penetration with your punch or kick. So a good drill to do is lock your knees and then shove the hips forward, bending the front knee, locking the back leg, like so. All right, basic fundamental movement. Step and punch. Ready? 1, 2. Now this time, one of the reason we're doing this video series is because of interpretation. Every Taekwondo school and style does this particular move. And step backwards. 1. But what I see that most people do is that they get in the forward stance and then they do the punch, which they're losing their momentum of the body stepping forward or backwards. Since your body weight's your primary source of power, if you step into the forward stance and then throw the punch, you've lost your primary source of power, which is your body weight. So what we practice is stepping and then on the last instant shift everything forward. I teach that the stance is the end result of your movement. The stance is the end result of your movement. Don't get into the stance to do the movement, because then you've lost your momentum, your body weight. So a drill to do would be to step and just stay light on the feet, keep your knees locked, and then at point of impact, shift everything out. So the locked out position is where you're going to get your tremendous power, that last inch or so of the move. Also, the forward stance, and many people don't see it, is used in our Judo, Ju-jitsu, and Aikido. The movement like so. First of all, a stance is a transfer of body weight. So, for instance, we'll do an Aikido movement, overhead strike, if you will. If I blend with an overhead strike and come under, if my knee is bent, I have no power. But when I bend my knee to that particular angle and that particular position, then I've used my forward stance in part of my Aikido or Jiu-Jitsu movement. So you'll see that the karate stances, or what people feel are just karate stances, are also used in all the other arts. From this angle, we'll block, blend, shift. And you'll see that I'll end up almost in a fundamental move of one of the low defenses, which will be covered a little bit later. But what I'm trying to emphasize is the stance utilization is the key. So we use the forward stance tremendously to transmit the power and follow through with our energy. Also, another experiment you can do is, which was made famous by, of course, Bruce Lee, was the 1 or 2 inch punch. And the way you can do that is go ahead and just place your punch against the chest, not the solar plex, so we don't want to knock the breath out of them. But you'll notice that most students don't bend the knee. But by just bending the knee, you'll see that there's just tremendous power and leverage going forward. And putting just a little bit of energy in that and following through, you can have that tremendous penetration. In fact, just a little bit more. So the arm is locked, but the knee is straight. When I bend the knee and then twist the wrist, that gives you that tremendous impact at point of impact. So it's a little drill that I really highly recommend that everybody do, and this will make you feel more comfortable getting in your stance. One of the things I ask all my students is, look, how many of you want to increase your power by maybe 500% tonight? And everybody raises their hand. And I said, well, if you'll just use your stances properly, you can increase your power, your leverage, and your effectiveness just by using your stances. And I think that's what's missing in a lot of the martial arts schools today, is they don't pay attention to the stances. And the traditional martial artists, hundreds of years ago, that developed our skills, they didn't fight mechanically. They were probably ahead of their time, and that's one of the things that's very difficult for us to understand. What did they mean with all these techniques? So the stance utilization is the key, and that's where you can achieve tremendous power from that. Now the next stance we'll cover is the back stance. Now if the forward stance is primarily used as an offensive stance, the back stance is usually used as a defensive stance. So generally when you're in a back stance, you've pulled away from somebody, or you've blocked a technique, or you've moved back to break a person's balance. In the back stance, we have 60% weight on the back leg, 40 on the front foot pointed 90 degrees to the front, the rear foot 90 degrees to the side. Return to ready stance. The back stance is also adjustable. It's not a certain dimension. We use a back stance many different ways. Okay, back stance. Now, if you're using it as a block, the back stance, the rear heel is about 2 inches out from the front heel. But if you're using it into the chop position, and the low chops, which we'll cover just a little bit later, then the heels are parallel and the shoulders are also parallel to the side. So the back stance is adjustable. I see some schools only use a back stance one certain way, and it's just like in fighting, you have to move your feet and adjust. Now, some different interpretations for the back stance. Basically, if somebody grabs you, and a lot of people think the back stance is only used for blocking punches or kicks. But, you know, hundreds of years ago, people grabbed each other and wrestled just like we do today. In fact, most fights end up in a grappling situation where people are grabbing onto each other. So, just simply by moving back, I'm breaking my opponent's balance, I'm lengthening his arms, I'm giving myself just a fraction of a second to make my defense a little easier, whatever my defense might be. Using the back stance, we also use it a lot in our Judo, Jiu-jitsu, and Aikido. So if I step back here and break his balance, and then I turn back. I've used two of the traditional stances I've already explained so far. I used the back stance to break balance. I shifted to a forward stance to apply the application of the move. And you'll see the locked out position. A lot of times it doesn't have to be totally that clean, but the stance is, once again, the key of transmitting and shifting your body weight in order to apply the technique. Okay, the next stance we'll use primarily will be the cat stance. Our cat stance is basically a very short back stance, 80 and 20. It could be a little different. It could be 70 and 30. 60 and 40 is our back stance. Some schools are 70 and 30, 80 and 20, 90 and 10. Or when you go to a crane stance, there's 100% weight onto the back leg. Now I think the cat stance is a little bit misunderstood. For instance, if somebody grabs me from behind, if I shift my weight back, you see I've shifted to a nice cat stance. So once again, a stance is nothing more than a shift of body weight to a particular point to be used for power or leverage. So if you just shift, then you can defend or whatever you're going to do with your movements. But the stance is the key, once again, shifting the body weight to a particular point. Another use of the cat stance is if you're standing square up and somebody starts to kick you in the groin, a lot of times it's never suggested, at least I don't, to move down and try to block it with your arms. So if you're standing square up, if you shift quickly to a cat stance, and let's do it at this angle too, you'll be able to see that you can use your cat stance as a low defense against a kick. And it's very easy to do. So the cat stance, I feel like sometimes is a little misunderstood. In the 60s, when I started martial arts, the Taekwondo fighters, we fought out of the cat stance because primarily we used our front leg for kicking. Over the course of the last 3 decades, we've become more of a what we call a three-quarter stance, both feet evenly distributed, being able to use our hands equally as well as the feet. So you've seen even the modern Taekwondo fighters have changed the footwork a little bit, but the stances are still there for self-defense purposes. So once again, the cat stance can be used for blocking, or if somebody grabs you, shifting, and then going into your defensive movement. Okay, the next stance primarily we'll work on will be a crane stance. Now a crane stance is seen in a lot of the higher ranking Taekwondo forms. And it's in there for several reasons. One, for balance, having to stand on one leg and do certain movements. Just like in gymnastics, you know, Taekwondo forms are artistic expression of your physical technique. So the way you express yourself and the balance, the coordination, the breath control, everything's taken in consideration. But the crane stance, there are a lot of times that you have to stand on one leg. And if you think about it, every time you throw a kick, you're standing on one leg. So your base leg is as important or more important than the kicking leg. So the crane stance is used a lot of times to show balance and also weight shift, where you're coming back. In our weapons fighting class, if I had my front leg in front and he was going to hit my leg with a stick, then I may shift it back and take it out of the way, which common sense tells you, hey, move your leg out of the way. So a lot of times it's just shifting and then coming back in. And we do that also a lot of times. So the crane stance is used nothing more than to shift your leg back out of the way for defensive purposes. The next karate stance we'll cover will be the cross stance, and some styles call it an X stance. Okay? That's where the legs are locked behind each other in an X formation, if you will. Now, what's important here, I don't know if you can see from here, but you should lock the back knee in behind the cup of the front knee, just on the calf muscle, and sit down. From here, it should be comfortable. Now, the cross stance is used a multitude of ways as well. A lot of times, what we will do from defensive purposes here, if you can see my feet, two-hand grab from behind, if you will. Once again, the stance is the key. When I step across to shift my weight, then my whole body weight is going to shift around to get the person's arms off of me. If I try to turn and the person's strong, you can't do it. But if you transfer your body weight, go into the cross stance, shifting into the forward, And then going into your defensive movements, the stance is the key to the success of that particular move. Also, in our judo class, back here if you will, sometimes if you're grabbed from behind, one of the first things we teach, if it's a surprise, is break the opponent's balance. So when I twist sideways, it pulls this person off balance temporarily, so I can set for some movements. Once again, the stance, without the stance, I'm not in position to do the rest of the move. So a lot of times we'll twist to a cross stance to break our opponent's balance to get him in a certain situation for a move. The last stance that we use in our fighting system is our fighting stance. Take fighting stance if you will. Now our fighting stance depends, there's many different fighting postures, depends on if you're primarily a puncher or a kicker. But from a Taekwondo base and also a boxing base, we use a 3/4 stance. That means that the feet are 45-degree angle to the front. The front knee is bent in to guard against any straight line kicks coming into the groin. Also, you'll notice that the front leg is in a natural roundhouse kick position. The chest is at a 45, so it can turn straight forward or straight sideways equally as easy. The center line targets are off to the side. The defense is up. Our weight's evenly distributed. Our feet are about shoulder distance wide. And all we do is bend the rear knee down and set. That way you can move forward, backwards, up, down, left, right, equally as easy. You can execute a front leg kick, a rear leg kick, or you can spin backwards as easy with any type of kick. So our stance is pretty much halfway in between all the other stances. Come back, ready stance. So once again, in closing, in the stance format of the video series is first of all, learn to use stance utilization. Learn why you use your stances, how to shift your body weight, and your power and the execution of technique will increase tremendously. The second part of the basic tape will be the open hand strikes. If Todd will, he'll get in a straddle leg stance. You'll see in many schools like this, everybody teaches the open hand strikes. They go through the movements, and then that's as far as they go. But inside each one of these movements is a wealth of information. Also, there's techniques designed in there not only to just defend yourself with, but possibly even to take someone's life if you have to. And I feel like a lot of students really don't take these moves seriously. And so what we're going to do is just basically run through the techniques from a class format. Then I'm going to break down each technique and the many, many different applications of each technique and angles that all these techniques can be used at. Okay, let's start with just a basic horizontal punch. Ready? Punch, punch, punch. Then, from the horizontal punch, we're going to work the vertical punch. Straight out vertical with the elbow down. Ready? Vertical punch, vertical punch, vertical punch. Then even closer range, we go to a half punch or an inverted punch as it's called. Inverted punch, punch, punch. Now I'll break this down just a little bit later. Now going into the open hand strikes. Remember, Taekwondo means punch and kick art. Well, the punching means the hand. So the hand, every part of the hand becomes a weapon. And many times the Oriental masters and even the modern day masters develop their knuckles and callous their knuckles, not just so they can break a lot of wood and concrete like we've done over the years, but so they can penetrate the pressure points and the muscles and the tendons of their opponent's body even deeper. So the knuckles are part of their weapons as well. Let's go now to the palm heel strike. Ready? Strike, strike, strike. Using the palm of the hand. Now the eye strike. Ready? Strike. Now the fingertips are the primary weapons. Strike, strike. Now we'll go to a claw hand. Ready? Strike. You'll notice on the claw hand, the last little joint of each finger is positioned differently. And once again, I'll cover that a little more in depth a little later. Let's go to the knife hand chop. Ready? Chop, chop, chop. Even though the chop is thrown out, there's many different angles to throw this chop. Now we're going to do a reverse chop. Ready? Reverse, reverse, reverse. The difference between these two are the distance of your opponent. Now we have the downward chop, 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 chop. Now we have the reverse center chop. Ready? Chop, chop, chop. And now we have the upward chop. Ready? Chop. You'll notice that the stance will shift. Chop and chop. So the chop can be thrown at many different angles. Coming back now to a web hand strike. Ready? Strike. Some styles call this an inside ridge hand. We call it a web hand. Ready? Strike, strike, strike. Just this technique alone, there are many different interpretations and self-defense moves used for that. Now the spear hand. One. There are 3 different spear hands. You can do a 1-finger spear hand, 2-finger, or 3-finger. It's called a Kwon Soo. Ready? Strike, strike. Now we can also do it vertical into the sternum or solar plex or in behind the rib cage. Ready? Strike. There's 2 different types of ridge hands or spear hands. Some with the fingers closed, some with the fingers open. I'll break that down a little later. Ready? Strike, strike, strike. Now the ridge hand. Ready? Strike. This is thrown with the part of the hand between the thumb and index finger. A lot of people say, well, use the muscle. The muscle is fine, but primarily what I use are the 3 bones. The 3 bones of the wrist, the index finger, and this knuckle on the thumb. Ready? Ridge hand, ridge hand, ridge hand. And we also can strike that to the groin as well. Thought already stands? Okay, turn and face. Now, first of all, we'll start with just the horizontal punch. A lot of people don't understand, first of all, the wrist has to be straight and parallel with the forearm. A lot of people punch incorrectly. So as a beginner, you want to make sure that this is locked in here. So when you're punching a heavy bag, or if you happen to use a Marcarari block to position and make the wrist tight, that's very important, whether you're throwing a punch as a hook or an uppercut or straight over. Basically, we use a horizontal punch in long range. We use a vertical punch in medium range. We use a inverted punch in close range, kind of like boxing. Also, we incorporate boxing in our complete system. But the knuckle position is very important, where you're hitting. The primary targets of the body, a big part of being able to really be a master of the open hand strikes in Taekwondo or other martial arts is identifying the targets, the vital points, the pressure points of the body, so your strike will be effective, not just punching and hoping it hits or hoping it's effective. Primarily the punch is used on the chin. The jaw is the weakest part of the face in here for a knockout. Another pressure point would be up in here. You'll notice a lot of times you can go ahead and extend the middle finger and go into the temple area with a punch right there. That will send a blood clot towards the brain and temporarily make a person pass out, drop them right to the floor. The inverted punch, we come in, we punch instead of straight, we punch upward, upward. Back towards the lungs and back towards the heart. So instead of just punching straight, angles are very important, that you punch up and shoot those floating ribs up, so forth. The vertical punch, I feel, is probably one of the strongest punches because the elbow stays in tight to the body, you're not losing leverage when your elbows come out, and a vertical punch is used straight in. A lot of styles don't use it, but it's very effortless to do, and it's very quick on its release. You notice that the hips release first, and my hand only travels about 3 or 4 inches. So the punching primarily is, you should break down into horizontal, vertical, or inverted, and then come at different angles. The next technique we'll work on, and a lot of styles use, is the karate chop, the Judo. Positioning over here, knowing the targets of the body is very important. Now, if I'm in medium range position, it's important to identify ranges. This is why we have drills such as one-step fighting and so forth. The basic knife hand chop is a medium range technique. If I'm out here, this technique is not going to be able to be used there. So if I'm in this area, I know that that's a possibility. The temple primarily is one of the primary targets, but there are many other ones. You have the carotid artery, it runs along the side of the neck. Now, a lot of people only chop straight in, but the most effect of the karate chop to the carotid is not striking straight in, because when you strike, basically the blood from the carotid artery is going to rush both directions equally as fast. But if you strike at the neck and then penetrate and angle it up towards the brain, then the biggest part of that strike and the effect of the blood rushing to the brain is going to be there a little faster. And that's what's going to make that person either blink or temporarily pass out, and a lot of times drop all the way to the floor. So see, a lot of people just chop straight in, and that's effective. About 20% of the time, a person may drop to their knees or even pass out with just a basic chop to the neck, if it's done fast enough. But if you'll just take that chop and angle it up towards your brain and straight up, you're going to scrape it up. And that rush of blood is going to go to the brain much faster than ordinary, and it's going to cause that person to be disorientated, drop out, or pass out. You also have to take into effect, if you're in a combat situation, that this person's blood pressure and his adrenaline flow is also higher than normal. So his blood's already pumping to the brain much faster than ordinary. So any chop that you do is going to be a little easier and more effective because his blood pressure is already up, the blood's pumping, and anything you do is just going to be that much more. So speed is of the essence there. So what I want to clarify here is the chop, not straight in is effective, but straight in and up. Straight in and up. Another primary target we use, we're very successful with, is just on the jawbone here. It's on the outside. There's a pressure point there, and a pressure point basically is where two energies cross. It's like a positive energy and a negative energy, and if you push on it, then that's what makes it short out, pretty much like a battery. You've got positive and negative, and the pressure point is just anytime you interrupt that particular energy flow, you get some type of effect. And the energy basically is the electrical system of the body. So in the chopping, we're working with the blood here. When we hit this point, we're working with an energy point that automatically affects the legs, and we'll get more in detail a little later. So one of the primary targets, if you hold your chop like this, is right on that jawbone. So that's one target that I see a lot of people miss. One of my favorite targets is the vagus nerve, which is over in here. So you have your carotid here, but the vagus nerve also creates a devastating effect to the opponent. So if you strike here, or strike here, individually, you're going to get, there's different types of chops, different types of angles, depending on what you want to hit. Another point on the side of the neck is the mastoid area here, which is a whole different area that affects the inner balance, the equilibrium of the ear. Now, if you chop correctly, it's very possible to connect on the mastoid, the pressure point, and the vagus nerve, and the carotid artery all at the same time. So once you hit all of them at the same time with one chop, then you're going to really have a devastating effect on the body. The temple, I find, is a very small area to strike into. You have to be very lucky, especially if the person's head's moving and combatively. You've got to be real lucky to hit there. But the side of the neck pretty much is open. So once you go into that side of the neck and you go up and in, then the knife hand chop can have a more devastating effect. The reverse knife hand chop is more of a longer range. See, I can't hit with a knife hand, but the reverse knife hand chop I can. So the different types of chops are depending on the different types of angles. The same target areas are also apply. The temple, the mastoid, the jaw point, the carotid, or the vagus nerve into here. All right. Now, if we're close this way, then we have the center chop. If the hands are down, the center chop comes straight up into the trachea, the windpipe. It comes from out of nowhere, and it's a very devastating technique, and you can come up with the knife edge of the hand, and also I like to use the ulnar bone. The bone is much more effective than the muscle tissue. In fact, bone is more than 200 times stronger than muscle tissue. It's been examined. So a lot of times you use your forearm bone right into the windpipe. So we use the center chop as a quick, devastating technique, as one of our lead-off techniques. Then we follow up with whatever else is in order at that time. The other chop, if I'm in close combat situation, is a knife hand chop to the groin. A lot of times, whether it takes the man down or not, it will distract that person's attitude and his aggression towards you, so you can follow up with the next technique. So if he's close and you drop down into the stance and you throw the chop, instinctively, whether it's effective or it hurts or not, everybody will react to that situation. It's called an autonomic reflex action. That means pretty much it's an automatic reflex, because when somebody strikes at your groin, we have this autonomic reflex that we have no control over, that we just do instinctively. So whether you strike or not, or kick or not, a lot of people will flinch, and that's all you need if you're a trained martial artist to follow up with another technique. So the upward chop should be applied in your self-defense as well. The next angle of chop will be the downward chop. Now the downward chop, if the person's standing straight up vertically, is used primarily to the collarbone. The collarbone is about as strong as one of the pine boards that everybody breaks. Everybody breaks boards in Taekwondo, and this is about that strong. If you hit it right in the middle with enough force, then once the collarbone is gone, that shoulder is basically useless at that point. So the collarbone is one target that I don't see used very much. Primarily, we'll shoot in, use the chop to the back of the neck. Not straight on the back of the neck, but either to one pressure point on either side. And that just sends a jolt to the brain, making the person pass out. For probably 20 years in the James Bond movies, you'll see people chop the back of the neck, person drops out. And it looks like it might work every time, and a lot of times it will. If it's done properly, it will make a person pass out temporarily, but it has to be applied exactly at the right angle. So my suggestion is to get an anatomy chart, study the specific points of where each pressure point is, which vital point of the body, where the primary targets are, and go into deeper study with that, because I think that's one of the lost, probably hidden movements in a lot of the arts today. Is I travel around the world and people are fighting and they're winning trophies, but they've lost the real true meaning of the open hands. And after 30 years in the arts myself, I went full circle. I started out traditionally, I went full circle with kickboxing, judo, Ju-jitsu, and I've come back to appreciate how effective these open hand strikes can be and how effective just a traditional arts could be. Because back in the beginning, some masters only knew maybe 5 different forms, or Hyungs, or katas if they were Japanese. And these people were considered masters. But on the surface, they look totally defenseless. They look mechanical, and they look like that the person couldn't defend themselves. But if you master each movement in each one of those techniques, then those moves can be devastating or sometimes even deadly. Next thing we're going to work on is what we call the web hand or the inside ridge hand. Now on the surface, a lot of people will use it to the windpipe. I use it, first of all, I use the bone of the index finger as a stunning blow right to the windpipe, just to make the person react and choke back. Then if you go in behind the trachea with all 4 fingers and the thumb, then you can get a choking effect. What you're doing there is just cutting off the oxygen supply to the brain. So that has 2 movements when you're shooting it out. It's a hit and then a squeeze. If you go up just a little wider, you'll have the carotids on both sides. The last joint of the thumb, the last joint of the middle finger or index finger can apply pressure in. So here I have the windpipe, the trachea. Here I have the carotids. It can be used in. And you need to use both of those. In self-defense situation, before I use those, I usually take the person to the ground or push them up against the wall or a car. I was in law enforcement for many years, and so this was a very effective technique for me without having to hurt the person seriously. I could put them in a choke or get them off balance in order to get them in a controlled situation. The other web hand use, we come up to the side. It's the same technique. We use the thumb just below the jawbone here. There's a pressure point that's very effective here. So we're using it into here to make the person react. So sometimes what you have to do, especially if you're smaller or weaker than your opponent, you have to break their balance in order to get your techniques to work. The bigger the man, the bigger the pressure point. So these will work on every human being. It's just a matter of the web hands can come in. You can do them both at the same time or one individually. Also, you come in, you have the jugular notch right here. Pushing into that is very effective as well. So just the hand in this formation has a devastating effect. You can go to eyes, you can go to the jugular notch, you've got the trachea, you've got the carotids, you've got your pressure points on the side. So it's just a devastating technique just to use your hand like this. There's a multitude of self-defense techniques just waiting to be discovered with your hands like this. Our next open hand strike will basically just be an eye strike. Now I use the eye strike a lot as a lead-off technique. A lot of times you may have to get lucky to poke somebody in the eyes, but no matter how big someone is, their eyes are just as sensitive. So I teach a lot, especially to children, that if a stranger was to grab them or pick them up, go to the eyes, because their eyes are sensitive and probably they'll be able to be let go, and then it can take off running. But a lot of times if we strike towards the eyes, once again that autonomic reflex action comes into play. The person will blink or flinch back. Whether you strike the eyes or not, then you're off and running with your combination of techniques. So the eye strike is very instrumental as a lead-off technique if not being effective. If you're lucky enough to poke the eyes and the person can't see, then you're ahead of the game. If not, you've got that split second to react to another situation, whatever techniques you choose. So we use the eye strike, and the hand basically is more in a horizontal position. Put the finger spread wide. But what you have to do with the eye strike is you have to make each finger like sticks. So your energy has to project out. The fingers cannot bend. So when you're extending your energy, they have to be strong and like little sticks or pencils, like this, and I spread them. So a lot of times we'll just throw them out there, and that person will react, and we're able to follow up with a combination. The claw hand is similar to the eye strike, except that the wrist is pulled back against the forearm. The claw hand primarily is used for scratching. We use the claw hand a lot of times, once again, autonomic reflex action. I teach in self-defense, if I come this way, the person will react away from that aggression. And that would then set this technique up for a chop or a follow-up technique. So a lot of times a technique will be thrown not primarily as a hit, but as a setup technique to get a person to react. So scratching this way may make the person come back. And when they come back, then you're right into the technique. So you can go this way, this way, this way with it. I use the claw hand to grab the hair a lot. One of my favorite techniques is to come in from the rear into the eye sockets here. You can come into the lips or the nose, whatever you can get a hold of in a combat situation. The claw hand can also come around, grabbing the person's ear and pulling back and working into self-defense. So the claw hand is very instrumental in not only grabbing, scratching, but clawing at the person to set the techniques up for your other open hand strikes. Now we'll cover the spear hands, the different applications of the spear hand. The primary target is a jugular notch right here. Generally, 2 fingers can fit in there, but it's very effective against every human being. We use the spear hand. Sometimes I come in vertically like this or horizontally. 1 finger spear hands, of course, can be used towards the eyes. 1 finger spear hands can be used into the pressure points of the neck. 2 finger spear hands can be used to the back pressure points of the neck coming back towards you. So everything that's shot out in basic fundamental stances don't necessarily mean that everything has to go out. Because a lot of times the retraction or the positive or the negative action of the technique can also be used. So if I shot out, it might be this or this. But if I brought the technique back, then it might be this. So a lot of times people have to look at the technique on the negative side of coming back towards you, as opposed to always extending your technique out positively. The negative action also comes into play in self-defense. Spearhanding into the solar plex. If a person has a strong stomach, big stomach, it's hard to penetrate the stomach wall. But you have to penetrate the sternum area, just into the pit of the stomach. But primarily it can be done with 1 or 2 fingers. If your fingers bend, you're not going to be successful. Another way to use the spear hand is keep the fingers spread wide, go in behind the abdominal wall, not where the rib cage is, but between the stomach muscle, and the rib cage, in behind the stomach muscle. If you look at an anatomy chart, there's more nerves behind the stomach muscle than anywhere in the body. So if you can penetrate that stomach muscle in behind there, then you're going to get a devastating effect with your spear hands. And it's going to take a lifetime to develop your fingers to shoot in behind that wall, and you have to be exactly perfect with your application. But once again, that is an option if you decide to do so. You just have to know that behind the stomach muscle, the reason this muscle is so strong is it's a safety device to guard all the nerves that runs down both sides of the body. So penetrating that and striking those nerves can have a devastating effect on the opponent. Our next technique will be the ridge hand, one of my favorite techniques. The ridge hand, you'll see it used a lot in tournament competition. They'll come in and strike to the side of the head. Once again, the temple, the side of the neck. In close, I use the ridge hand. If I'm grappling, I use it from behind. I strike coming back this way to the person back of the neck to loosen them up. I use the bone from the wrist, the thumb, and the index finger. The muscle is a little soft there. No matter how much you try to develop it, that muscle is a little soft. So anytime you can strike with bone, you're going to be better off. So I use that fork-like position of my hand to strike with. The bone, 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 bone. So we're using the ridge hand. It's also effective into the body, to the back of the neck, to the side of the neck, to the head. So any position that you can get into to use the ridge hand primarily is going to be effective if you turn the hand over. The ridge hand primarily is used as a long-range type of position out here. If you're in close, strike straight up. So, you know, there's just a wealth of information to be able to use each one of these hand techniques successfully, and so many techniques just in self-defense techniques just waiting to be discovered just with the open hand strikes of Taekwondo. The third part of this basic tape are the 7 defenses we use in our fundamentals. If you will, please. Working, first of all, moving forward with a back stance, low defense. Now remember, the back stance, I said, is used basically for defensive purposes. So we're going to do our defenses in back stances and forward stances, then I will interpret what each move means. Moving forward now with a knife hand defense, high defense, moving backwards with an outside defense, an inside defense, moving forward with a low reinforced chop, and moving forward with a middle reinforced chop. And moving back with a low defense, knife hand defense, turn around with high defense, turn around with outside defense, step forward with inside defense, step forward with low chop, step back with center chop. Throw a reverse punch, and return. Well, those 7 defenses basically look pretty mechanical in their application. Also, a lot of times the interpretation of the defenses are lost in the actual self-defense application. The way that the hands are folded, the position of the hands, the angles that the defenses come in. Now, I call them defenses. A lot of people start out, first of all, martial arts is a defensive art. It's not taught to be offensive, even though once we're attacked, then we become offensive as a matter of defending ourselves. But the defenses, I call them defenses because they are not only used for blocks, but they're also used for strikes, also used in arm bars, also used in our throws. Let's do the same defenses in a forward stance. Moving forward, low defense, forward stance. Now you'll see that the hips in a forward stance twist as opposed to coming straight forward. Again, 2. Moving forward with knife hand defense. Moving backwards with high defense. Moving backwards with outside defense. Moving backwards with inside defense. Okay, now moving forward with reinforced chop in a back stance. Low chop. Good. Return. So, the defenses have to be taught, 1 in a back stance and then 2 in a forward stance. They have totally different applications. Let's take the low defense for instance. A couple of self-defense moves for the low defense. If somebody grabs you, first rule of self-defense when somebody grabs you is break their balance, one way or the other. Actually, technically, there's 8 different ways to break balance, but the most common way and the most spontaneous thing that people do when they're grabbed or attacked is to step back away from the aggression. So if I just step back and lengthen his position, I can come across and just simply knock the hands off. So this can be an application of moving back into a back stance, low defense position. Remember, a stance is nothing more than a shift of body weight. So when I shift my 190 pounds back and drop the weight down, then it gives me the power and leverage to knock the hands off. So it's just a basic interpretation. Also, each one of these moves has many interpretations. There will be a basic interpretation, an intermediate interpretation, and then the advanced interpretation. So as the students progress in their rank and their skill, you can show them more interpretations and fundamental movements and the more advanced self-defense moves in the techniques. Another example of the forward stance application, if I'm turning right here, if he grabs me from the side and I turn and I use my low defense right here, I'm in a forward stance, low defense. And that is the first move of many of the Taekwondo Hyungs. So moving right there, bottom fist strike. It's the same exact movement except I'm using the bottom of the fist to strike into the groin. I'm shifting my weight, dropping into my forward stance, twisting my hips, full power going in. So that's another interpretation of the low defense. The advanced interpretation of the low defense, you'll notice in all the defenses, the hands cross certain directions. Well, that has a special meaning. Coming with a straight punch or a straight attack, whether it's a weapon or not, when the hands cross for your low defense, coming down in this position, the quickest block that I feel is not the same side blocking. That's a little slow for me. I always try to block with the opposite hand. So when my hands cross like this, getting ready to do the low defense, this hand blocks first. This hand comes around and grabs. Then as I move into my forward stance low defense, I have a self-defense move, creating an arm bar pressure on the back of the ulnar nerve into here. Let's come at this other angle, if you will. So a lot of people miss this particular move of twisting the wrist. Now the reason the hand locks into the hip bone is because that's the center of gravity in our body, and we're strongest around our center of gravity and our center of energy. If I move forward and drop this down, then I'm creating pressure. And a lot of people don't interpret that particular self-defense move when they're doing the forms, moving over here to the side. So once again, when you cross your hands, you'll see that there's two movements. And this hand twists up, exposing the arm, the base of the tricep or the ulnar nerve, the forearm coming down, full body weight onto the back of the elbow like this. Our next defense will be the knife hand defense. Simply put, as a fundamental, if somebody tries to punch you, we teach them to block. If we move back, we have the back stance block. But if I block and move forward into the chop, if I use a forward stance, then it's an offensive strike. It's a chop. If I move back, it's a block. If I move forward, it's a chop. And that's simply put. So a forward stance is for offense, shifting the body weight towards your opponent. The back stance means moving back away from the aggression. Using the knife hand defense, simply put this way, a lot of shoot straight if you want. You're learning to come in with your what we call windmill blocking. So as your hands cross, folding for a knife hand defense, you might see in the advanced interpretation that you're able to block and parry the hand out, redirect and chop, or grab and chop into this position. So as you shoot quick, you're able to come in. If I shift to forward stance, the person is all the way off balance going to the ground. Once again, slowly block, redirect, grab, twist, shift forward, and a strike right into the side of the neck. And it's an advanced and it's a very devastating self-defense move, and it's hard to practice unless you see the movements. So the first thing it touches is the left hand. Second hand comes up outside the left hand, continuing the small circle, moving into my move, twisting, and then striking. So that would be this move. Looks harmless, but also very devastating if applied properly. The next defense will be the high defense. Fundamentally speaking, stepping back, blocking something coming down to the head. If it was a stick or a hard object, the arm would be diagonal. So hopefully the object would slide off and minimize the shock or the impact on your arm. And most people interpret that as the only application for the high defense. But if somebody grabs us, like they've grabbed our clothing, we're in here grabbing, you can step back and knock the hands up. Use it as a disarming particular point coming across. So you'll see the hands come over. I grab this one, and then I strike this one up. One of the advanced interpretation, if it's a single grab and you're coming under for your fold, it's a strike up under the ulnar nerve. And as you pull back, you have the arm bar, and you're trying to snap the elbow coming up. So it's a trap coming up this way. And a lot of people don't see that that particular motion can be used. Another interpretation, moving forward in a forward stance, whether they grab you or not, it's used moving forward, striking up to the windpipe or under the chin, or just striking forward with the hand to the chest. So the movement of shifting the stance this way can mean a number of things. Knocking the hands up, striking the person in the chest, under the chin, shifting to a back stance, blocking your head, something coming down vertically, And in the advanced interpretation, trapping that hand against your chest and coming up under the elbow for an arm bar. The next defense will be the outside defense. Now, basically put the back outside defense, people step back to a back stance, and they block with the forearm. And that's all well and good. So that's a simple defense with that. Again. But what they don't see is, right at the point of impact, the radial bone that runs on the outside, or the inside of the arm, at point of impact, the wrist twists. And so if there was a weapon involved here, you also see there's already a red place there. The bone penetrates the nervous system of the arm. So if there's a weapon involved here, it's going to make that hand open every time. So a lot of people just basically put their arm out there for defense. But it's the penetration and the angle that you throw it that makes it effective. Second application, basic application, if I change the angle, if I just step into here and change it over, it can be a back fist to the nose. So if I change the angle to bring it out this way, I can be blocking. If I change it in close, fighting, I can turn it into a back fist. If somebody grabs me, I step back, I can come here and use it to knock their hands off. Another interpretation, if it's one hand grab here, step back, another arm bar this way, coming in. Because as I pull down and snap, then you're trying to dislocate the elbow. So a lot of people don't see that that is in the movement. The most advanced interpretation for this particular movement, from the side or from the front, doesn't matter. If they grab you or you're in a combat situation, if you step in and you use the strike right across the neck, I explained earlier in the tape, we have the carotid, we have the vagus nerve, we have the mastoid. This strike comes straight across. So your first move in basic form number 3 of the Taekwondo forms is this. Back stance, outside defense. If I step deep, trapeze leg, I'm using the triangle of bones, the wrist bone, the thumb bone, the index bone, to the side of the neck as hard as I can. It's going to have a devastating self-defense move, which I don't want to have to put on my assistant at this time. But you can see that it's there. Perfect for execution there. So there's many moves hidden inside just the fundamental movements. Our fifth defense will be the inside defense. Basically, if somebody grabs us, the inside defense comes the opposite direction, from out to in. We can step back, we can knock the hands off. That's a simple interpretation. This hand folds, knock the hands off. Come this way if you will. Okay? So that this hand strikes in to the pressure point on the forearm here. My other hand, which crisscrosses, comes straight across. All right, also, once you knock the hands off, this can be used as a hammer fist strike to the temple, or once again to the sensitive side of the neck. Also, against the grab, if I step back, I can use the inside defense as a forearm strike. If I turn the person on around to here, you'll see that I have a basic Jiu-Jitsu self-defense move. So just from a basic inside defense, stepping to a back stance, my hands crossing, I have pressure as I step, and I come down. So there's a lot of hidden movements that parallel many of the other arts. And over the course of almost 30 years, I've been able to crisscross the different arts into seeing that many of the forms, in the Taekwondo forms and the other martial arts forms, are actually grappling type of movements as well. Arm bars, throws, etc., as opposed to looking at them like somebody's always punching and kicking at you. So looking beneath the surface of each move, once again, is a wealth of information there. So reviewing the inside defense again, I can block it with it, I can strike with it, I can arm bar with it, or I can knock the hands off with it. So there's 4 basic self-defense moves just for the inside defense. We'll go a little deeper inside the form. Now the reinforced low chop with a hand sticking out in here. For many, many years, probably 20 years, I've heard maybe 20 different interpretations of this hand sticking out here, and it just didn't make sense to me. Because when I always fought with my hands up or moving around, but I never kept one hand just on my solar plex. So I never did buy it that I'm guarding my solar plex there, but until I started figuring out that maybe the positions were against arm bars and so forth. On the low chop, first of all, come this way if you will,
Sure.
and we'll go against the left hand. Now here's the basic movement. I'll do it first. As I come back and come out like this, a lot of practitioners just think of the positive movement, the outward movement. That's all that they're concentrating on. But there's two movements to this. First of all, this particular movement, which is your defense, the step back, pulling your opponent off balance, locking in, and then the follow-up. So if his hand wasn't there, then I'm in a nice back stance. The reason I move back is to stretch his arm tight. If his arm's stretched tight, the nerves are closer to the top of the skin. It exposes the area of the neck for a perfect strike here. If it's a low chop, it'll be down in this area. If it's a middle chop, it'll be up in here. Right now we're explaining the low chop. So I'll do it from here, block, scrape back. I'm pulling them off balance, and as I twist up, then I'm right into the arm bar position on the base of the tricep, which is a very sensitive area right here. The ulnar nerve is not a hit point. The ulnar nerve on the back of the elbow is a push point. So as I push down and shift my weight, that's what drops the man. If I hit it, it doesn't hurt that much. But if I push it, then it has more of a devastating effect. Let's do the kick, if you will.
Sure.
Let's switch legs, if you will. So a lot of times when you're sparring, we spar in class, we try to be nice with each other. We block, and then we fire back. And we block, and we fire back. But if it was a real self-defense situation, and you were confronted by more than one opponent, and you had to take somebody out with one strike or one hit, then these movements are the movements to do it. First of all, if we just block with one hand, the person is still there, and we have to deal with their hands and their feet and their combinations. If I'm blocking two hands and stepping back, then I'm pulling that person off balance, breaking his balance, breaking his mental concentration on what he's going to do with his follow-up techniques, and then I'm able to expose his leg to attack. So as I block, it basically has the same concept as the arm. The nerves on the leg and the ankle. If you're exactly pinpoint on your strikes, those are strikes. And once I hit that, that will make the foot pretty much paralyzed, and when he puts his foot down, he wouldn't be able to regain his composure quite so quick. Also, the energy runs down the leg just like it runs down the arm. So if I strike not straight down but back towards his ankle, then it's going to shoot some extra energy towards your ankle and temporarily paralyze that. Shoot. Now, my first move is the backward movement. I'm trapped, and now I've got his thigh area exposed for the follow-up. So just let me do it first. So this move here, the backward movement, is the block, the strike, the trap, and then the follow-up. So just this simple movement looks kind of harmless, but you're fighting. And then if I hit that hard with my bone, then it's going to collapse that leg, your opponent's down. The reason you step back is to pull them off balance, stretch everything tight to make the nerves more sensitive. Going to the seventh defense, which is a center chop, it's this movement here and this movement here. So the step back would be the block. Once again, I'm striking back towards his wrist to try to get this energy shoot into his hand. The energy runs down across towards the ridge hand or the thumb and back up. So what I want to do is the energy is flowing back up the inside. I want to be able to shoot it back towards the wrist to dysfunction the basic normal flow of his energy. So when I'm striking like this, I'm trying to come back towards his wrist. And then I'm trying to grab in here. So as I follow through and then follow through here, then you've activated the two pressure points in the wrist. You twisted them, you've torqued them, and then you go to the side of the neck pressure point for the knockout. This particular technique is taught in the Pyongan Chodan at blue belt level. I feel it's probably one of the most devastating and probably misunderstood techniques there is, but also one of the most effective, especially against a knife defense and right into the side of the neck. Then from there, you've got all your movements can go together. Once again, your basic defenses, following through, has interpretation. This hand won't stop here. It'll come all the way to here and follow right through for a follow-up chop to the side of the neck. So that covers the basic fundamental applications. Also the intermediate and advanced interpretations of the 7 basic defenses of Taekwondo.